My name is Raphael, and for the past 3 years, I've worked as a security operator in one of the most unwelcoming places in the city. A dilapidated, abandoned building that has long since surrendered to time and neglect. Most people wouldn't dare set foot in there, let alone work the night shift, but I've always found solace in the routine. My colleagues often joke that I had a sixth sense for danger, but truthfully, I was just drawn to the eerie beauty of the night and the quiet hum of the monitors. As the clock struck midnight, I settled into my chair, the glow of the screens illuminating the shadows in the dimly lit control room. The building stood silent around me, its dark corridors stretching like gnarled fingers into the unknown. I glanced over at Lucas, my partner for the night, who sat hunched over his monitor, furrowing his brow in concentration. "Another night, another ghost story," he quipped, a half-smile breaking through his typically serious demeanor. I chuckled, but a shiver ran down my spine as I thought of the tales that surrounded this place, the whispers of the past that echoed through its empty halls. The first hour passed uneventfully, the only sound being the soft clicks of the mouse and the occasional rustle of paperwork. But then, without warning, the calm was shattered. I leaned in closer to the monitors as static crackled through the intercom. At first, it was barely audible, just a faint whisper, but it grew louder, more distinct. "Help! Help me!" I exchanged a glance with Lucas, who seemed equally perplexed. "Is someone there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced as I realized the building was empty, completely devoid of life. He shook his head, a skeptical look crossing his face. "It's probably just interference. Let me check the system." I watched as he clicked through the settings, but the whispers continued, echoing like a haunting melody through the control room. The shadows on the monitors began to shift, dancing just beyond the edges of the screens. I felt a chill in the air, and as I turned my gaze back to Lucas, I could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. He cleared his throat, attempting to sound nonchalant. "It's nothing. Just some electrical issues." But deep down, I could sense that something was wrong. Something far more sinister than a simple glitch in the system. The night dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity as we monitored the screens, but the voices continued to resonate in the back of my mind. "Help! Help me!" they echoed like a mantra, pulling me deeper into a web of unease. Lucas kept glancing at the monitors, but I could tell he was growing increasingly agitated. Then it happened. A flicker on one of the screens caught my eye. I leaned closer, my breath hitching in my throat. A shadow darted across the corridor, too quick to be anything natural. "Did you see that?" I exclaimed, adrenaline flooding my veins. Lucas's head snapped in my direction. "See what? You're not seriously suggesting there's something in there, are you?" His skepticism hung heavy in the air, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Something moved," I insisted, pointing at the screen. "Right there. Look." He squinted at the monitor, but the shadow had vanished. It was probably just a trick of the light. "You're letting your imagination run wild." But I knew what I saw. The unease settled in my stomach like a stone, and I could feel the cold sweat forming on my brow. "Let's check it out," I suggested, unable to shake the growing sense of dread. Lucas hesitated, the doubt clearly etched on his face. "You want to go down there? In the middle of the night? Alone?" I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We need to find out what's happening. If it's nothing, then we can laugh about it later. But if it's something, we need to know." Reluctantly, he agreed, though I could tell he was still skeptical. We grabbed our flashlights, the beams cutting through the oppressive darkness as we stepped out of the control room. The corridors loomed ahead, stretching endlessly into the shadows. The air grew colder as we ventured deeper into the building. Each creak of the floorboards beneath our feet echoed ominously, and the whispers seemed to follow us, taunting us from the dark corners. "Help me," they murmured, a chilling reminder of the unseen presence that lurked within these walls. We reached the area where I'd seen the shadow, and I shone my flashlight down the corridor. Nothing. Just peeling paint and debris. My heart raced as the silence pressed down on us. Suddenly, a door at the end of the hall swung open with a creak that shattered the stillness. Lucas jumped back, his eyes wide with fear. What the hell was that? I took a cautious step forward, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity. Let's see. But as we approached the door, the whispers intensified, swirling around us like a tempest. I could feel Lucas's hand grip my arm tightly, and for a moment we stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee and the desperate need to understand what was happening. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open, and it creaked eerily on its hinges. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the scent of decay. As I stepped into the room, my flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing old, broken furniture strewn about like forgotten memories. Lucas followed closely, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "This isn't a good idea, Raphael," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But I was already drawn deeper into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. Something felt alive in here. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a swarm of angry bees. "Help me! Help me!" they echoed with desperation, sending chills down my spine. I focused on the source, straining to understand their meaning. What did they want from us? Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement, a dark shape slinking into the shadows. "Did you see that?" I breathed, excitement and fear battling within me. Lucas nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, I saw it. We need to get out of here." But before we could turn back, the door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. Panic surged through me as I pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the confined space. "Stay calm," Lucas urged, but his eyes betrayed his fear. The whispers intensified, now sounding more like cries for help than mere echoes. "We have to find a way out." The oppressive darkness enveloped us, and I felt the walls closing in. "This way," I said, leading Lucas toward a small window at the far end of the room. I pushed against it, but it wouldn't open. The whispers were almost deafening now, a cacophony of despair and fear. "Raphael, I don't like this," Lucas said, his voice trembling. "We need to find a way to communicate with the outside. Maybe we can use the radio in the control room." "Right. Let's go." I turned, determined to find a way back, but as I moved, the shadows seemed to shift around me, coiling like smoke. I could feel something watching us, lurking just beyond the reach of my flashlight. We scrambled back toward the door, but it remained locked, as if mocking our attempts to escape. The whispers morphed into anguished wails, pulling at my sanity. "What do you want?" I yelled into the darkness, my voice echoing in the void. In response, a cold wind rushed through the room, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into total darkness. Fear coursed through my veins as I fumbled for my flashlight, desperately trying to find the light again. "Raphael," Lucas called, panic rising in his voice. "I can't see anything." I finally found the flashlight and switched it on, the beam slicing through the blackness. But what I saw made my heart stop, a figure standing in the shadows, barely discernible. It seemed to flicker in and out of existence, its form shifting like smoke. "What the hell is that?" Lucas whispered, his voice filled with terror. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing. "But we need to face it. It might be our only chance to find out what's happening." The figure before me shimmered, its face etched with an expression of profound sorrow. "You must listen before it's too late." The whispers transformed into an urgent plea, echoing around us like a chilling wind. "What do you want from us?" I asked, my voice trembling but resolute. "I am bound to this place," it replied, its voice resonating with an ancient sadness. "The shadows you see are remnants of lives lost, souls trapped within these walls. You are the key to their release." Confusion and fear gripped me, but I felt a strange connection to the figure, as if it were drawing me closer to the truth. "How can we help you?" I pressed, desperate to understand. The figure flickered, revealing images of its past. Moments of pain and suffering played out like a forgotten film. This building holds the weight of forgotten lives. I was once a guardian of this place, but I failed them. You must find the archive, hidden within these walls. Only then can I be free." I exchanged a glance with Lucas, who was visibly shaken. "Raphael, we need to leave," he urged, his voice quaking with fear. But something within me compelled me to stay. I had to know. "Where is the archive?" I asked the figure, my heart racing with both terror and curiosity. "It lies beyond the 3rd floor, in the room marked with a faded symbol," it whispered, its form beginning to wane. "But be warned, the entity that binds me also protects this place. It will not let you leave without a fight." Lucas trembled beside me, his instincts screaming to escape. "We can't trust it. It could be leading us to our doom." "Or to salvation," I countered, feeling the weight of the figure's words. "We have to try. It's our only chance to uncover the truth." With that, I turned toward the doorway that had creaked open behind us, and the shadows seemed to part as we stepped into the corridor. The whispers faded slightly, replaced by a low hum that resonated with urgency. We climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, the air growing heavier with each step. The dim light flickered overhead, and I could sense the presence of something ominous lurking just out of sight. Finally, we reached the room marked with the faded symbol, a crude drawing etched into the door, barely visible under layers of grime. I pushed the door open, and a musty smell enveloped us, the air thick with dust and the weight of forgotten memories. Inside, the room was cluttered with old files and documents strewn about haphazardly. I began rifling through them, my hands shaking with anticipation. "Look for anything that stands out," I called to Lucas, who was scanning the room with wide eyes. As I flipped through the papers, a name caught my attention, a victim of the building's dark history, one who had suffered and been forgotten. The deeper I dug, the more names I uncovered, each one a soul tied to this place. It was overwhelming, and the weight of their stories settled heavy on my heart. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I felt a cold breeze swirl around us. Lucas's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. "Raphael, I don't like this," he shouted, panic rising in his voice. "Just a little longer," I urged, determined to finish what we had started. As I pieced together the fragments of the past, I felt the figure's presence grow stronger, guiding me through the chaos. Finally, I found a journal, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it, and as I read the words, the whispers intensified, swirling around us like a storm. "Help me, please." In that moment, everything clicked. The stories of pain, the cries for help, it all converged into a singular purpose. I knew what we had to do. "We need to speak their names," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos around us. "We have to acknowledge them, give them the recognition they deserve." Lucas nodded, his fear giving way to determination. Together, we began to read the names aloud, our voices resonating through the room. The shadows around us pulsed, and I could feel the building tremble with each name we spoke. As the final name escaped my lips, a brilliant light enveloped us, illuminating the darkness. The figure appeared before us, its expression transformed from anguish to relief. "Thank you," it whispered, its voice now filled with warmth. "You have freed us." The shadows began to dissipate, fading into the light. I felt a rush of energy course through me, and for the first time, the air felt lighter. Lucas and I stood in awe as the room transformed, the oppressive weight lifting as the past was finally acknowledged. In that moment, I realized we had not only confronted the unknown but had also given a voice to the voiceless. As the last remnants of darkness faded, I knew this experience would change us forever. With the echoes of the past finally at peace, we stepped back into the corridor, the night no longer feeling so terrifying. The whispers had transformed into a gentle hum, a reminder of what we had accomplished. "Let's go home," Lucas said, relief washing over him. I nodded, knowing that the journey had only just begun, but we had faced the darkness together and emerged stronger. My name is Marcus, and for the better part of a decade, I've worked in maintenance for the city. It's not glamorous, not the kind of job that gets you any recognition, but it pays the bills. My life outside of work is just as unremarkable. No wife, no kids, just a small apartment that I return to every evening, where silence is my only company. I suppose I've grown used to being alone. But lately, things haven't felt right. Maybe it's the routine, maybe it's the city itself. Sometimes, when the sun sets and the streets quiet down, it feels like the whole place is waiting for something to happen. Something off. I never let myself dwell on it too much, though. Maintenance guys like me, we're always too busy fixing the problems on the surface to think about what's lurking underneath. Tonight, however, would be different. It was supposed to be a routine job, just a quick descent into one of the oldest underground tunnels in the city to fix a generator. The thing had been giving trouble for years, but it finally gave out, and now it was up to me and Elias, the rookie, to go down there and sort it out. Ever been down this deep before? Elias asked, his voice echoing slightly off the metal walls of the service elevator. He was young, a bit jittery, and far too curious for his own good. I grunted, tightening the straps on my tool belt. Once or twice. Nothing to worry about. The truth was, no one liked going down into the deeper tunnels. There were stories, of course, about things moving in the dark, about people hearing voices down there. But stories were stories. At the end of the day, it was just us and the generator. When the elevator doors slid open with a groan, a rush of stale, damp air hit us. The light from our headlamps barely cut through the darkness as we stepped out into the narrow, concrete hallway. The walls were old, cracked in places, with patches of moss creeping up from the floor. The farther we walked, the colder it got, like the warmth of the surface had been left far behind. We fix this thing, we get out. Simple as that. I muttered more to myself than to Elias, though I could hear his boots shuffle a bit quicker beside me. We reached the first checkpoint, a rusty metal door that led into the generator room. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking in protest, and we stepped inside. The generator was massive, taking up most of the small room, and, of course, it was dead silent. No hum, no vibration, just the oppressive quiet of a machine that should have been working but wasn't. Elias set his bag down and started unpacking his tools. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered. "You'll get used to it," I said, though even I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't long before the real trouble started. We had barely begun inspecting the generator when I heard it, a faint sound like footsteps in the distance. At first, I thought it was just the echo of our own movements, bouncing off the narrow corridor outside. But then it happened again. A shuffle. A scrape. "Did you hear that?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I paused, listening. It's just the tunnel. Sound carries weird down here. But I wasn't sure. The sound was too deliberate, too distinct. As I knelt to check the wiring, I felt the cold creeping in, seeping into my bones. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from the damp air. No, this felt different. Like the kind of cold that comes when you're not alone, even when you should be. Elias glanced over his shoulder every few seconds, his hand trembling slightly as he held his flashlight. "Are you sure no one else is down here?" "Of course I'm sure," I snapped, though the edge in my voice betrayed my own unease. "Let's just get this done." But the noises didn't stop. The footsteps would come and go, fading into the distance and then returning, always just out of sight. And then there were the whispers. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. I couldn't tell if it was the air moving through the cracks in the walls or something else entirely. Elias stopped working altogether, staring out into the hallway, his face pale under the glow of his headlamp. What if it's not just us? I wanted to tell him to shut up, to stop letting his imagination get the better of him. But the truth was, I was starting to feel it too, the weight of something watching us, just beyond the reach of the light. "We're here to fix the generator, not chase ghosts," I said, standing up and brushing the dust off my pants. Focus. But deep down, I knew this was more than just nerves. Something was wrong down here. And the farther we went, the worse it was going to get. The thing about being deep underground is how isolated you feel. The walls seem to press in on you, the silence is almost deafening, and the only connection to the surface is through a crackling radio that works when it feels like it. Ours decided to stop working altogether about an hour after we got down there. I tapped the radio a few times, but nothing. Damn thing's dead. Elias was pacing near the entrance to the generator room, his flashlight sweeping over the same stretch of concrete wall over and over again. His nerves were getting the better of him, and I couldn't blame him. Something about the tunnel felt different tonight. More hostile, more alive. "We need to call this in," Elias muttered, rubbing his hands together. "I mean, we can't even fix the generator if we can't get the parts from topside." I shook my head. "We've got the parts we need. It's just a matter of getting it done." The truth was, I didn't want to go back up empty-handed. There was a job to do, and I'd be damned if I was going to let some strange noises and a busted radio stop me from doing it. But Elias wasn't convinced. He kept glancing back toward the hallway, his eyes wide and unfocused, like he was waiting for something to come creeping out of the shadows. "Look," I said, standing up and slinging my tool bag over my shoulder. "Let's just check the wiring down the corridor. Once we get this generator running, we're out of here." Elias didn't look reassured, but he nodded. We stepped back into the tunnel, the air colder now, the distant sound of footsteps still following us. The corridor stretched out before us like the gaping maw of some ancient beast, waiting to swallow us whole. With every step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, and the whispers became louder. But there was no one here. At least, no one we could see. We didn't get far before things went from bad to worse. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, and the deeper we went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The sound of footsteps was now constant, always just behind us, always just out of sight. "I can't do this," Elias muttered, stopping in his tracks. "I'm not going any farther." I turned to face him, frustrated but trying to stay calm. "We've got a job to finish, Elias. You can't just—" "I can't." His voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't just scared, he was terrified. I sighed, knowing we were running out of options. "Fine. You stay here, keep an eye on the equipment. I'll go down and check the wiring." He didn't argue. He just stood there, pale and shaking, clutching his flashlight like it was his last lifeline. Part of me wanted to stay with him, but the job needed to be done, and the sooner we got out of this place, the better. So, I left him there, alone. As I ventured deeper into the tunnel, the footsteps seemed to fade, but the whispers were louder now. They echoed off the walls, bouncing from one end of the corridor to the other, impossible to pinpoint. I glanced over my shoulder once or twice, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the dim glow of my headlamp flickering against the damp walls. For now. I don't know how long I walked before I found it, but when I did, the air seemed to freeze around me. The tunnel opened up into a wider chamber, one that wasn't on any of the blueprints we had. I stood at the entrance, my flashlight casting long, uneven shadows over the space, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. There, against the far wall, were signs of others who had been here before. Broken tools, an old, rusted helmet, and something worse, scratched into the concrete, barely visible under the grime, were words. "Don't look back." I took a step closer, heart pounding in my chest. The room felt colder here, like the warmth had been drained from the air. My light flickered, but I forced myself to look around. More signs of struggle. Marks on the floor, like something had been dragged. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. How long had this been here? Who else had come this deep? And why hadn't anyone ever told us about this? A whisper broke the silence. Close, too close. I whipped around, but no one was there. Just empty space, stretching back into the tunnel. But I knew better now. We weren't alone. We had never been alone down here. I grabbed my radio, tapping it furiously, hoping by some miracle it would work again. "Elias, come in. Elias, do you copy?" Static. The radio crackled, but there was no voice on the other end. I cursed under my breath, the eerie silence settling in again. I had to get back to him. Whatever was down here, it wasn't going to let us leave without a fight. I turned to leave the room, my headlamp flickering once more before plunging me into darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. That's when I heard it, a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. And it was coming toward me. I ran. I didn't care about the job anymore. My boots pounded against the concrete as I sprinted back down the tunnel, my flashlight bobbing wildly in the dark. The sound, the dragging, was behind me, getting closer with every step. I didn't dare look back. Not with those words still echoing in my mind, "Don't look back." When I reached the spot where I had left Elias, my heart sank. His tools were scattered across the floor, his flashlight lying in the dirt, still on but flickering weakly. But Elias was gone. "Elias!" I shouted, my voice bouncing off the walls and fading into the tunnel. "Elias, where are you?" No answer. Just the eerie hum of silence and the faint sound of that dragging noise, now further away. I knelt down, picking up his flashlight, and spun in place, shining the beam down every corridor I could find. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle. He was just gone. I tried the radio again, but it was useless. Panic clawed at the back of my mind. How could he have disappeared so quickly? 1 minute he was here, too afraid to move, and now it was like he'd never been here at all. My breathing came fast and shallow, the cold air stinging my lungs. Whatever had happened to Elias, it wasn't something I could explain. But I couldn't stay here. I had to find him. Or at least, I had to try. The whispers returned, louder this time, surrounding me. I felt their weight pressing in on all sides, as if they were circling me, watching, waiting. My pulse raced, and I knew I couldn't stay in one place. I had to keep moving, had to keep ahead of whatever was down here. But deep down, I knew it was already too late. I stood in the tunnel, my mind spinning, heart pounding in my chest. Elias was gone. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to think about what might have taken him. The only thing I knew for certain was that I needed to get out. Whatever was down here wasn't going to let me find Elias, and if I stayed any longer, I would be next. I grabbed his scattered tools and shoved them into my bag, trying to calm my shaking hands. The whispers were back, louder now, coming from every direction. I felt the pressure in the air shift, like something was circling me, stalking me. My flashlight flickered again, the beam growing weaker with every passing second, and I could feel the cold closing in around me. I started running. The tunnel twisted and turned, but my memory guided me. Left, right, through the narrow passage that had seemed so harmless on the way in but now felt like a trap closing around me. I didn't stop to look back, not once. Those words, "Don't look back," burned into my brain, pushing me forward, driving me to escape. But the footsteps, they were faster now. They didn't match my pace, didn't sound like echoes of my own movements. They were quicker, sharper, closing the distance with every turn. My breathing grew ragged, my muscles screaming for rest, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was this close. I stumbled into the wider section of the tunnel, the service elevator just ahead. It stood there like a beacon, the only way out. My legs felt heavy, each step harder than the last, but I pushed through the exhaustion. The whispers were almost deafening now, swirling around me like a storm, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I felt something brush against my arm. I slammed into the elevator door, frantically pressing the button. The old metal doors groaned as they began to slide open, slower than I had ever seen. The footsteps were right behind me. I could hear them, louder than ever, and I knew I didn't have time. I threw myself into the elevator, slamming my hand against the button to close the doors. The last thing I saw before the doors slid shut was a shadow, long and thin, standing at the edge of the hallway. I didn't get a good look, and I didn't want to. Whatever it wasn't human. The elevator jerked to life, slowly ascending, and I collapsed against the wall, my body trembling. My mind was racing, replaying every sound, every whisper, every step. I had escaped, but at what cost? Elias was still down there. Or maybe he wasn't anymore. As the elevator creaked upward, I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memories of what I had seen. But the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, never left. Even when the doors opened at the surface and the bright lights of the city hit me, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't really free. I stumbled out of the elevator, blinking against the light, gasping for air. No one was waiting for me. The city hummed on as if nothing had happened, as if two men hadn't just vanished into the depths below. I made my way back to the maintenance office, my footsteps slow, heavy with the weight of what I'd experienced. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I must have filed a report, though I can't recall the details. Elias was listed as missing, presumed dead after a freak accident in the tunnels. But I knew better. I never went back down there. Not again. And every time I passed a manhole or heard the hum of the city's generators beneath the streets, I felt it. The cold, the whispers, the footsteps that never really left me. We weren't alone down there. We never were. And we never will be. I've been a trucker for about a decade now. It's not the life I imagined for myself, but there's something about the open road that keeps me coming back. Maybe it's the solitude or the freedom from the day-to-day grind, but once you get used to it, the silence of the road becomes almost comforting. My partner, Mike, has been with me through most of it. We met on a long haul years back, and since then, we've been inseparable on these night shifts. That night started like any other. We were tasked with transporting a load across the desert. It was one of those quiet, clear nights where the sky stretches on forever, and the only thing guiding you is the thin line of asphalt and the hum of the engine. Mike sat next to me, staring at the GPS. He always did the navigating while I focused on the drive. "You think we're gonna get any radio signal out here?" Mike asked, tapping the screen of the truck's outdated GPS. It flickered but stayed on track. "Doubt it," I replied, glancing at the dark horizon. "This place is a dead zone." Mike chuckled. "Figures. No radio, no signal, just us and the endless desert." I shrugged. Nights like these were routine. The desert was just another part of the job, and I had learned to ignore the emptiness. We drove for hours in near silence, the only sounds being the rumble of the engine and the occasional crackle from the static-filled radio. But as the miles stretched on, something felt off. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first, just a nagging sensation in the pit of my stomach. Maybe it was the way the road seemed to go on forever without a single bend, or the fact that there hadn't been another vehicle in sight for what felt like hours. But I didn't say anything. Mike would have called me paranoid. It wasn't long after that when the first sign of trouble hit us. The GPS, which had been guiding us just fine, began to glitch. The screen flickered, the map freezing in place before turning blank altogether. "Damn it," Mike muttered, tapping it furiously. "Stupid thing's gone out." I frowned, glancing at the road ahead. "No big deal, just stay on this road, and we should hit the next turn eventually." "Yeah, but which one?" Mike's tone was tense. "This road doesn't exactly have a lot of markers, man." I tried to stay calm, but the creeping unease from earlier started settling in deeper. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of us, a barren wasteland under the faint glow of moonlight. There wasn't a single sign of life. No gas stations, no mile markers, not even a distant set of headlights to reassure us that we weren't the only ones out here. We kept driving, relying on our instincts and memory. But after a while, I started to notice something strange. The road didn't seem familiar anymore. Not that it should have been. I'd only driven this stretch a handful of times, but there was something off about it. The lines on the pavement seemed to blur together in the rearview mirror, and the horizon stayed dark and unchanging. "You sure we're going the right way?" Mike asked, his voice quieter than usual. I hesitated. "Yeah, I think so." But the truth was, I wasn't sure at all. The longer we drove, the more uneasy I became. There was something about the road, something unnatural. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was playing tricks on me. It wasn't just the darkness or the isolation. It was as if the road itself was bending to some unseen force. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I caught sight of headlights in the distance. A car was coming up behind us fast. Too fast. I squinted, trying to get a better look in the rearview mirror. But just as quickly as the lights appeared, they vanished. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. Mike shifted in his seat, his eyes glued to the side mirror. "What? That car? It was right behind us, and then it was gone." He frowned, looking over at me like I'd lost it. "I didn't see anything, man." I wasn't about to argue, but I knew what I saw, or thought I saw. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from the truck. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. We kept driving, and things started to get stranger. Every few miles, I swore I saw flickers of light, phantom cars passing us in the night. But each time I turned to look, there was nothing. No taillights. No headlights. Just the endless black stretch of road. "Okay, this is getting weird," Mike finally said, breaking the silence. "Where the hell is everyone?" I didn't have an answer. I just kept my hands tight on the wheel, my eyes scanning the road ahead. Something wasn't right. It felt like we were driving through a ghost town, except we weren't in a town at all. We were in the middle of nowhere, and the road just seemed to stretch on forever. The road never changed. No matter how long we drove, it was always the same flat, featureless stretch of asphalt, flanked by darkness on either side. There were no turns, no signs, no indications that we were getting anywhere. Just an infinite, unchanging path. "What's going on?" Mike muttered, glancing at the GPS again, though it was still blank. "It's like we're not moving at all." I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to feel the same way. My foot was still on the gas. The speedometer told me we were going at a steady pace, but it was like the road was looping. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were trapped. Mike sighed heavily and rubbed his temples. "I don't like this, man. We should have hit something by now. A rest stop, a gas station, anything." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crackle of static on the radio, which had long since given up trying to find a station. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, my sense of time started slipping. Was it 2 a.m.? 3 a.m.? I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that the road ahead was endless, and there was no turning back. As the minutes dragged on, so did the feeling that something was wrong, deeply wrong. Mike's usual laid-back attitude had been replaced with a nervous energy. He shifted in his seat constantly, his eyes darting to the mirrors and then back to the road. I could feel the tension between us rising, like an invisible pressure pressing down on the cab. "You sure we're not going in circles?" Mike asked suddenly, his voice tight with anxiety. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to snap at him, tell him that of course we weren't. It was just the desert playing tricks on us. But the truth was, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The road seemed to be toying with us, stretching further with each mile we covered. "I don't know," I finally admitted, gripping the wheel tighter. "It feels off." Mike let out a low, frustrated laugh. "Feels off? That's an understatement, man. I'm telling you, something's not right here." I didn't want to hear it, but the doubt had already started creeping in. Maybe he was right. Maybe we weren't just lost. Maybe something else was at play. The longer we drove, the more it felt like we were being watched, like there was something just out of sight, lurking in the shadows beyond the road. It wasn't long after that when the real terror started. It began small, Just little things that made no sense. The road signs that had been there moments ago suddenly vanished, leaving us with no idea where we were. The temperature inside the truck dropped, despite the heater being on full blast, and a thin layer of frost started forming on the inside of the windows. "Jesus, it's freezing in here," Mike said, rubbing his hands together. He cranked up the heater, but it didn't seem to make a difference. I glanced at the dashboard. "The heater's fine. I don't understand." But that wasn't the worst of it. It was the figures, those shadowy, human-like forms that appeared along the roadside, just out of reach of the headlights. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but Mike saw them too. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. He pointed out the window, where the figures had been standing, unmoving, as we drove past. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Yeah, I saw it." The figures never moved. They just stood there, watching. The air felt thick, heavy, as though something was pressing down on us. Every mile we drove seemed to make it worse. The truck's engine began to sputter, the once steady hum turning into a series of unsettling coughs, as if the vehicle itself was succumbing to whatever was out there. "We need to stop," Mike said, his voice trembling. I shook my head. "No way. I'm not stopping here." But deep down, I knew he was right. Something was following us, something that was getting closer with every second. The road, once our ally, was now a trap, an endless, twisting loop that held us in place. I glanced at the gas gauge, suddenly aware of how fast it was dropping. "We're running low on fuel," I muttered. "Great," Mike said, his voice rising in panic. "What next?" I didn't have an answer. The only thing I knew for sure was that we had to keep moving. Stopping meant giving in, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. But with every mile, the sense of being watched grew stronger, the strange occurrences more frequent. And the figures were getting closer. We had driven for what felt like hours, and the gas gauge was inching dangerously close to empty. The figures along the roadside had become more frequent, more distinct. They weren't just shadows anymore. They had form, though still hazy and indistinct, like they were part of the darkness itself. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the road. It was as if the asphalt beneath us had come alive, stretching and warping, twisting in ways that defied all logic. The lines on the road seemed to move, shifting positions in my peripheral vision, as though the road was rearranging itself right under our tires. No matter how much I focused, it never stayed the same. Mike had gone quiet. Too quiet. I glanced over at him, and the look in his eyes was pure terror. He wasn't just scared, he was unraveling. "This isn't real," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "None of this is real." I didn't know how to respond. A part of me wanted to agree with him, to say that this was all some kind of twisted hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever was happening to us, it was real, and it was getting worse. "Look," I finally said, trying to sound calm even though I was anything but. "We need to stay focused. Whatever this is, it's messing with our heads. But we can get out of here. We just need to keep going." Mike didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on something ahead, something I couldn't see. I followed his gaze, my breath catching in my throat. Up ahead, the road split into two. Both paths looked identical, stretching out into the dark, endless horizon. But the feeling in my gut told me that one of them wasn't real, that if we took the wrong turn, we'd be lost forever. "Which one do we take?" Mike asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I didn't answer right away. My hands were trembling on the wheel, and the air in the cab felt thick, almost suffocating. I stared at the two roads ahead, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But there was no logic to it, no signs, no markers, nothing to guide us. "It doesn't matter," I said finally, the words bitter on my tongue. "We're not getting out of here by driving." Mike turned to look at me, confusion etched on his face. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, the realization sinking in. The road wasn't the answer. It was the problem. No matter how far we drove, no matter which path we took, we'd still be trapped. The only way out was to stop running, to face whatever was out there. "We need to stop," I said, my voice steadier now. "Whatever's doing this, it's feeding off our fear. If we stop, maybe we can break whatever hold it has on us." Mike hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the endless road ahead. "You really think that'll work?" I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure myself. But it was the only chance we had left. We pulled the truck over to the side of the road, the rumble of the engine slowly dying into an unsettling silence. It was the first time we had stopped since this nightmare began, and the air around us seemed to thicken even more, as if the very atmosphere was watching, waiting for us to make our move. The moment I stepped out of the cab, a cold chill crawled up my spine. The night was unnaturally still, and the darkness felt heavy, almost like it was pressing down on me. I glanced over at Mike, who was standing stiffly by the truck, his eyes wide as he stared into the abyss beyond the road. "You ready?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if I was ready myself. Mike swallowed hard and nodded, though the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Together, we stepped away from the truck and into the dark, leaving the only source of light and safety behind. The road seemed to ripple under our feet, as though it was alive, shifting and twisting with every step we took. The figures in the distance, the ones that had been mere shadows before, became more defined. They stood still, watching us, their forms just out of focus. I couldn't tell if they were human, but there was something undeniably menacing about them. We kept walking, our steps slow and deliberate, as the weight of the darkness pressed harder against us. It felt like we were walking straight into the jaws of something far worse than we could imagine. It was Mike who stopped first. "Wait," he whispered, grabbing my arm. "Look." I turned to where he was pointing. Up ahead, the road seemed to flicker, like a mirage. One moment it was there, stretching into the void, and the next, it was gone, replaced by something else. For the briefest second, I saw trees, real trees, and a faint glow of light in the distance. "We're close," Mike muttered, his voice trembling. "We can get out of here." But I wasn't so sure. Whatever this place was, it wasn't going to let us go that easily. I could feel it, the pull, the way the road seemed to wrap itself around us, keeping us trapped in its endless loop. If we kept walking, it would only pull us back in. "Stop," I said, pulling Mike back. "We need to stop." Mike looked at me like I was crazy. "What are you talking about? We're almost out." But I shook my head. "It's a trick. The road's messing with us. If we don't stop now, we're going to end up right where we started." Mike hesitated, his eyes darting between the flickering image ahead and the solid endless road beneath our feet. Finally, he nodded, his shoulders sagging with resignation. Together, we stopped walking and stood in the middle of the road, waiting for whatever came next. The moment we stopped moving, the road shifted again, but this time, it didn't flicker. The endless stretch of asphalt began to crumble, revealing the desert beneath it. The illusion was breaking. The road disintegrated beneath our feet, the cracks widening to reveal the true landscape, a barren, endless desert stretching as far as the eye could see. The figures that had once haunted the edges of our vision began to fade, their forms dissolving into the darkness like smoke. The oppressive weight that had been suffocating us lifted, but the silence that followed was just as unsettling. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. I looked over at Mike, and he seemed equally stunned by the sudden shift in reality. The flickering mirage of trees and light was gone, and in its place was just an empty stretch of desert. "It's over," I whispered, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. Mike exhaled slowly, his breath shaky. "We did it. We broke through." We stood there in silence for a moment, neither of us daring to move, as if the road might reclaim us if we did. But nothing happened. The asphalt remained broken and fractured, and the eerie, otherworldly sensations that had plagued us were gone. "Let's get back to the truck," I said finally, my voice low but firm. "We need to get out of here." Mike nodded, and we made our way back to the vehicle, the cold night air biting at our skin. The truck was still there, waiting for us like a faithful companion, but the unease in my chest hadn't disappeared completely. Even as I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, a part of me felt like we weren't truly free. The road had let us go, but at what cost? As I pulled back onto the highway, the once endless stretch of asphalt seemed to have returned to normal. The lines were solid again, the road no longer twisting and warping under our tires. But the silence between Mike and me was heavier than ever. Neither of us spoke as the miles ticked by, the desert slowly giving way to distant lights on the horizon. We had escaped. That much was true. But the experience had left its mark on both of us. I could feel it in the way my hands gripped the wheel, tighter than usual, and in the way Mike kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting to see something following us. As the lights of a distant gas station came into view, Mike finally broke the silence. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. I didn't know how to answer. Part of me wanted to reassure him, to say that we were safe, that we'd made it out and nothing would follow us. But the truth was, I wasn't so sure. The road might have let us go, but the memory of it, the feeling of being trapped, watched, toyed with, would haunt me for a long time. "We'll find out," I said, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "But let's not stop just yet." Mike nodded in agreement, and we drove on, the lights of the gas station growing closer. But even as we approached safety, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to pull us back in. Because once you've been on that road, once you've felt its grip, you never truly leave. We've reached the end. Which of these stories did you find most intriguing? Comment below. Thank you and see you later.